Good morning, everyone. We're up to our second virtual presentation for the Perth Vegan Expo Psycho-Narelle Virtual Edition. This presentation, we've got Fiona Darcey here from Aussie Soil Blocks. Fiona is an activist, an engineer, and a nerd. Fiona runs a local business called Aussie Soil Blocks that produces native plant and vegetable seedlings. This presentation is an enthusiastic amateur's insights into gardening in Perth for food and for fauna. So now I'll hand it over to Fiona.
Cool. Yes, that's right. It doesn't do anything. You can just start hearing me. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I'll start with an acknowledgement of country. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians on the land on which we work, the Wadjuk Noongar people, and pay my respects to Indigenous elders past, present, and emerging. Wow. I apologize. Emerging. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Okay. So, can I move my little icon around? No? Yes, there we go. Cool. I've just included the Vegan Society's definition of veganism here in the corner. And that's because I think in the sort of gardening world, there's a lot of sort of animal product dominance that's tied into sort of arguments that we can't have a food system without animal exploitation. And part of my thing is we very much can. And I use no animal products in my small business, and I want to talk about how I do that. More in the garden. This is not meant to be just self-promotion, but obviously it's relevant to my experience, so I'll be bringing it up. I have no formal training in horticulture or in ecology or biology, but the thing that got me into electrical engineering was renewable energy, was my concern for the impacts of climate change. The thing that's gotten me into plants more recently is actually more my concern about the biodiversity crisis, which I think might actually be worse. And honestly, we understand engineering far more than we understand ecosystems. I think it's a very underrated science. That said, this is a presentation. It's insights, it's a little bit of the philosophy of veganism, it's a little bit life hacks. But if you want to have a lawn and some pretty flowers in your garden, I don't think you need to feel guilty, you know? You're already vegan, or if you're not already vegan and you're here, you're probably already trying to live as sustainably as possible. So if there is something a way you want to have your garden look, or if you want to have a lawn for your animal companions or your kids to run around on or any of that, and you don't want to grow food and you don't want to grow native plants so much, or you want to grow a mix, don't feel guilty about it because I told you to. I'm just some person in Perth growing plants. So this presentation's going to have a couple of sections. The first section is going to be kind of the theory. And then the second section is going to be a few things I've learned, a few sort of uncommon garden hacks, a few ways to do things, to garden in a way that's vegan. And I'm a big believer in that we are responsible not only for the animals we directly exploit. So we're not just responsible for the animals in factory farms. We're not just responsible for the fish in fish farms. But when we impact ecosystems through our food system, we are also responsible for the land clearing that was done to build those factory farms, or to, have those pastures for grass-fed beef or whatever. And that we are responsible for the mass extinction events that happen largely as a result of animal agriculture. There are other impacts, but animal agriculture is definitely the number one driving force of our biodiversity crisis. So, garden like a vegan, what does it mean? Excuse the icons. I thought I'd gotten rid of those. This is a template. The obvious one is no animal products. Now, I think it's perfectly ethical to use animal products if you're not paying for them, if you're not paying for animals to be exploited. If a sanctuary or a vegan organization is selling animal poo, then you can pay for that. If you go to a busy bee or something and you bring home a couple of bags of cow poo or whatever animal you're cleaning up after, that's completely ethical. Go for your life. Or if you've got rescue hens and you use the spent bedding in the garden. But then if you're going and buying a bag of, say, manure from a garden center, for example, and you open it up and it's straight manure and there's no sand in it and there's no weed seeds in it, not only are you contributing to animal exploitation, but I guarantee that did not come from like a field. There wasn't a person walking around picking up sheep poo perfectly, only getting the sheep poo and no sand in there. That's come from a feedlot, from a factory farm, something like that. And then if you grow plants, if you grow indoor plants, or if you use, bagged soils in the garden, almost all of those contain animal products. It'll be manures, it'll be blood and bone, it will be fish meal. Not only is that sort of not ethical by the vegan definition to purchase, but potentially quite dangerous if you've got pets or small children. Dogs will eat blood and bone fertilizer. They don't know any better. And they can get very sick. And there can be nasty bacteria in there. There may be antibiotic resistant bacteria in there, especially if it comes from a factory farm. I could have referenced this, but I didn't have the time. It's a deep dive you can do on your own, though. It's pretty scary, actually, some of the info. And then we're talking animals as individuals. So I think that if we have gardens, if we choose to look after a patch of land, we've got a responsibility to the animals already there. So not the animals that we bring with us, not our animal companions. But if you go out in your garden in the middle of the day, you'll see insects, you might see lizards. If you've got a pond, you might have frogs, probably motorbike frogs if you're in Perth. How do we provide for them? Because they were here first. What do they need as individuals? What might be inadvertently harmful? And that's an important one because there are big corporations not doing the best, trying to make a quick buck off people who want to help, but not using best practices, and selling products that are not actually helpful. More on that later. Then we're talking gardening for biodiversity. So the southwest of Western Australia is what they call a biodiversity hotspot. It means we've got an incredible range of animals and plants in the southwest. That if you kind of look at a square meter of forest floor, you'll find more species in that square meter than you would in a square meter in most other places. And Australia also has extremely high rates of land clearing, and a very high extinction rate. How they count extinction rates is more complex than I would have thought going into it. But we do have a very high species extinction rate, and we've got a great many birds and mammal species that are critically endangered. We've got a great many plants that are critically endangered. We've got a great many smaller plants and smaller animals and insects that are critically endangered that we haven't even discovered yet, and we're never going to know about them, and they'll be gone. And then also gardening for food security. And look, there's a strong drive in anyone who's environmentally minded to eat local. And, you'll see people arguing that it's better to eat local beef than it is to eat, beans that are imported from another continent, and this is not true. This is not the case. The beef still has a much higher carbon footprint, however you count it. Even if you don't care about the animal suffering aspect, just the carbon footprint of raising a cow is massive. And I get to say that because I look after cows in my spare time. So eat local makes a lot of sense, but how do we grow food crops at home so that we minimize our impact effectively? And then how do we build community around growing crops if we're concerned about food security? And I like to believe that I'm not going to have to worry about running out of rice and beans within my lifetime. I like to believe that we're smarter than that. But fresh produce is getting expensive, you've probably noticed. And then how do we do that without impacting local biodiversity? So why support biodiversity? It's almost like a social taboo to ask this question. But I think it's got some relevance, especially if you're a vegan, in that, you know, why do we care about the species of the animal when we should simply care that the animal's an individual, they are an individual, they can suffer. So some background is you and I are what's called a super generalist. And a generalist is an animal that can eat a wide range of different foods. So, I can eat, what do I eat? I forgot. I can eat tofu scramble for breakfast, and then I can have a salad for lunch, and then I can have pasta for dinner. And the ingredients for these things are from vastly different plant families. They come from different continents. And I can switch it up, day to day and be healthy. Most animals can't do this. So if you change your pet's food, there'll be like this little notice on the back of the bag saying, hey, change it over a period of a week. Dogs are a little bit sort of generalists. They can eat a wide range, but they still struggle with sudden changes. Examples of animals that you may have heard of that are not generalists, for example, are numbats, which is WA's state animal. They're also, I think they're still classed as critically endangered. There's very few of them left in the wild, and they only eat termites. And when they breed them in captivity, like they do at the Perth Zoo, they can only eat termites. They can feed the males like half termites and half like a custard substitute that they make. But if they want them to be able to breed, they have to feed the females only termites. So they can't actually eat anything else and thrive. Or horses are a good example. I'm a reformed horse girl, so I know a bit about the topic. If you're feeding a horse oat and hay one day and then you change them to wheat and hay the next, they're probably going to get colic and die. Even though they can eat a wide range of different grass species, they're very dependent on having a continuous source of roughage. They're very, very dependent on their gut bacteria for digesting that. And so if you change them from one species of grass to a different one, with no kind of intermediate period where you're doing half and half, they can very quickly die from that because their guts cannot keep up. So within ecosystems, obviously numbats and termites are extremely codependent. So if there was a sudden disease that killed off most of the termite population, there would be no wild numbats left and possibly none in captivity either. Other examples, a common example is you'll have a flower and we either don't know what can pollinate that flower. It's a funny shape, and we know that super generalist animals like honeybees cannot get into there. Honeybees are another super generalist because they can get pollen from a wide range of flowers. But a lot of other bee species, of which there are, I believe, thousands of species of native bees, and other pollinators that are just as important, such as flies and beetles in Western Australia. They'll often be evolved for one family of plants or even for one specific species. And so if we lose the bee, we lose the plant. If we lose the plant, we lose the bee. Sometimes if we lose the bee and then we lose the plant, there's another species that's relying on that plant for food. Maybe it eats the seeds, maybe it eats the leaves. So then we can lose that one as well. So this ties into my belief that as vegans, we're responsible not only for the animals we harm directly, but for the animals that are harmed as a result of our activities. If we lose biodiversity, the ripple effects from that can lead to multiple extinctions and the deaths of thousands of individuals. And And this probably happens a lot more often than we realize, because often you'll have ecosystems dependent on animals that are small and hard to differentiate. So, you might have two different species of flies that look exactly the same to us, but they fulfill completely different roles within an ecosystem. And we won't even notice when one of them is gone. And then 10 years later, there was a plant that was dependent on that fly, lives for about 10 years. Suddenly that plant's gone. There's none left because it hasn't been getting new seeds set within that period. Then, whatever animals, whatever species are dependent on that plant, then they're gone as well. Probably, as soon as all the plants are. And there's not necessarily anyone keeping track of these. I mean, there are, but it's woefully underfunded. And it's not considered a priority in a lot of the scientific community even. So here's an example from the United States of America, not from here. But it's a good example because it's one species of bird that supports an entire forest ecosystem. So basically, it's Clark's nutcracker is a bird. It's in the corvid family, so they're related to crows and ravens. They're omnivores, but they eat mostly the seeds of this one pine tree. They eat multiple pine trees, but it's mostly a specific species of pine tree that they're reliant on. And they harvest the seeds, they go out, take the seeds, and they cache them, they put them in holes in the ground. And the common story is that they forget where a lot of their caches are, and then the trees grow. But for all we know, they're actually saving for a rainy day. So they may be storing excess seeds in case the next couple of years are bad. But these pine species are actually now dependent on this bird burying their seeds. In that ecosystem, potentially some of the seeds will sprout on their own without the bird's intervention, but in order for the population of trees to be maintained, they require the Clark's nutcracker. The Clark's nutcracker is not currently considered threatened. However, if anything were to happen to the species of pine upon which it's reliant, or if anything were to happen to the bird, so when I say anything, a new disease, a new pest, a nuclear warhead, a poison or a pesticide that bioaccumulates like DDT. Because the birds are corvid and they're omnivorous, they're very susceptible to heavy metal poisoning. So if there were an event that caused heavy metal contamination within their habitat, that could severely impact their species. That would then impact that species of pine. And we wouldn't see the ripple effects of that for years, probably, because these are very long-lived tree species. But even a temporary, if there was a temporary event that reduced the population of the Clark's nutcracker, or in other words, killed a bunch of them, that could have a ripple effect 10, 20, 30 years down the line that was disastrous, because these forests, the whole forest ecosystem relies on a few species of large tree that's heavily reliant on primarily one species of bird that is related to other birds, looks quite similar to a lot of other bird species to us, but there isn't a backup organism to spread these pine seeds effectively. It's really just the Clark's nutcracker. Cool. So, suppose you've agreed with me, and we should support biodiversity within our yards, within our gardens. The most important thing is actually to support existing long-standing forests, and you do that through activism. I said 20 minutes originally, but on the schedule it did say 30, so I'm assuming that I'm good. If you don't have the counter, I'm 19 minutes and 22 seconds into my presentation. So activism. Supporting an entire ecosystem that already exists is going to support hundreds or thousands of species, many of which haven't even been described by science. So we're not just talking large animals, we're not just talking birds and mammals and lizards, reptiles, we're also talking insects, we're talking microbes, we're talking bacteria, yeasts, we're talking small plants like mosses and lichens, good luck working out what species of moss you have. But it may actually be very important in the ecosystem. It may produce compounds that other plants rely on. It may produce compounds that clean waterways that waterway relies on. It may simply preserve the balance of bacteria within an area, and without that species of moss, as bacteria species may become overabundant and cause follow-on problems. So activism is the most important thing that you can do, especially when you're concerned about biodiversity, preserving old growth forests. Planting trees, regenerating land is important, but it's not really possible to restore the biodiversity of an old growth forest. Or if it is, we haven't worked out how. Because you are often talking hundreds of species within a square meter of Earth. You know, you put a square down randomly on the ground somewhere, you count the plant species, you count the moss species, you count the insect species. You and I can't do this because we actually don't know enough to identify between, two different species of millipede. But the biodiversity is there, and just because it's not obvious to us doesn't mean it's not vital to the ecosystem. So the next most important thing you can do, at least in Perth or Boorloo, or the southwest region, is to put out water for wildlife, but only if you can keep it clean and if you can keep it consistent. So Perth is very hot, very dry weather. Not right now, but most of the time. Sorry, I lost my train of thought because I realized I didn't show you a soil block at the start, but stay until the end and then I'll show you one. What we don't realize is that Perth used to have huge wetlands that were drained in the 50s through to the 70s for housing developments. And so a lot of species in Perth, whilst adapted for very hot and dry conditions, are also reliant on having a consistent water source that they can get to. Carnaby's cockatoos are a good example of this. And that's the reason why you've got the installations known as cocky troughs in a lot of urban councils now, which are, or bird waterers. So they're those big steel poles with a bird bath right up at the top. That's partly to keep the birds that use them safe from predators such as cats and dogs, and also to keep the water source as clean as possible and safe from humans because some people are just sick. You can do the same thing. So if you're able to have water that is clean and a consistent supply, would lean towards having water available for wildlife in multiple zones, if you like. So you would have water on the ground, which will support some of your larger lizard species, which will support frogs. You can have a pond. A pond is not going to be clean. So if you have a pond, you probably also want to have water in a dish that you clean from time to time, because some animals are able to deal with dirty water. Frogs are, if they're living in your pond's got kind of a bacterial balance that they are okay with. Don't go take tadpoles from somewhere else and put them in your pond because you may spread very bad fungal infections between frog populations and have a net negative effect. And then having something like a bird bath, and I would recommend having that in the open so that there is not somewhere for a cat to lurk because your neighbor won't keep their cat inside and attack the birds. And then also having water potentially up high, which is not natural, but is a good way for larger birds to be able to find it, to be able to safely land and get a drink. You'll often see cockatoos in this kind of weather that we're having now where it's raining, drinking the oily water from puddles in the road. So if we can give them an alternative to that, that's a really good thing. And keeping it clean is very important for those larger birds because we're trying to prevent the spread of beak and feather disease, which is a very nasty disease, and has become used to only be seen among smaller parrots, but has started to be seen among larger cockatoo species as well. So that's the most important thing. If you have a garden, honestly, supplying consistent clean water is probably the most important single thing you can do. Then the next most important thing is to grow plants that are native to your region, and that's very important. You don't want to grow a plant. So if you're in the foothills, you want to find a plant that's native to your region. Ideally, you want to go to a local nature reserve and walk along. You don't have to be an expert. You can use Google Lens. You can use one of the many plant identification apps. Walk along and work out what's growing there. And then don't take seeds from your local reserve. That's not legal and it's bad. But try and source ethically and legally the same species and grow that in your garden. That way, if there are remnant populations of an insect or even a microbe in that local bush reserve that are endangered or that are both endangered and undocumented, you're giving them just a little bit more habitat, a little bit more food, a little bit more space to allow them to continue to survive. And the ripple effects from doing that can be pretty profound. Another thing you can do is grow endangered plants, and I've written there native and non-native. And what I mean by that, by non-native, is not necessarily exotic. I think there's a place for growing non-native plants, especially house plants from other regions, but also Australian plants that are native to your region or native to other regions is what I mean by non-native. So this is an example. Oh, here we go. This is a seedling small-leaved tamarind. In the wild, this is native to northern New South Wales. It's a rainforest tree. In the wild, there's estimated to only be about 15 of these left. I've got hundreds. So they'll be up on the website as soon as they're big enough to survive transplanting. But I purchased one tree from an Indigenous organization that's trying to bring them back. They're a bush tucker. They have an edible fruit. It's very sour, but also very distinct and very tasty. Even though it's not native to my region, by having these in gardens and having multiple people growing them in multiple areas, we now have a sort of a reserve. So if something happens, if there's a wildfire in that forest and we decide that this is an important tree for a small ecosystem there and we need to reintroduce it, there's now, thousands of these growing in people's gardens around the country. And so we've got a genetic bank, we've got a seed bank. That's my 2-minute warning. While I'm talking local plants, this is a soil block, by the way. So it's just a cube of dirt. You use a tool that looks like this that you can buy on the internet to make them. And they're really good for native plants because native plants often don't like having their roots disturbed. And so when I plant this in the ground, I don't have to disturb the roots. I can just dig a hole and pop them in. This is a ruby saltbush. So this is not endangered, but it is native to where I live. And it's another bush tucker as well. So it's food for me. It's food for local animals. And it's very easy to grow, very drought hardy, very well adapted for the region. Okay. Let's see, what's my next slide? Honestly, a lot of this is info dump. I'm going to talk briefly about food. I very much recommend you go through and read these. And especially the section Know Your Natives. But I'll finish with this. Know Your Natives. So many businesses, including the Big Green Shed, will sell you pollinator-friendly garden flower mix. It's all exotic plants. It's friendly to honeybees. It's friendly to native bees who are super generalists. It's not friendly to native pollinators. They sell bird boxes that are the wrong size, that leave baby birds vulnerable to predators, which means either the birds simply won't use them, or if they do use them, a cat will get its cat arm in there and eat the chicks. They sell bee hotels that are too short. So a lot of native bee species will lay females at the back of the tube and males towards the front. You can argue that that's sexist, but then, bees also use a completely different genetic rules to determine sex, so whatever. They need to be a certain length, and there are businesses selling them that are far too short. So whilst you shouldn't... Oh yeah, and also noxious weeds. So weeds that if they get out into your bushland, They're going to cause havoc. They're going to outcompete native species. That's my time. You shouldn't have to do that research, but unfortunately you do have to. So being a bit of a nerd, being enthusiastic about your gardens is very important. Okay. Kimmy's here to kick me out, I think.
Thank you so much, Fiona. That was incredible. And as you know, you and me have had multiple conversations about gardening. I've picked Fiona's brain so many times, and I will continue to do so. Speaking of weeds, I've got this ginormous, I think it's a South American tree, and it grows as a weed and it spreads everywhere. And
fun.
It's very, very hard to get rid of. So that's been a great deep dive. But we've had a lot of positive comments come through. Melinda said such a great point about the
I was in the wrong tab. There's lots of comments. That's nice.
People don't really think about that. No, we had people listening, which was great. And she also said she loved this soil block of the sweet potato that she bought from you. At the
I'll put the slides up on my Facebook page for now. And I know this talk will eventually be available on YouTube, so they'll be visible there as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it will stay on Facebook as well, so people can pause the presentation and have a look through. But if anyone has any more questions for Fiona, you can always put it in the comments. You can contact Fiona directly. Once again, Fiona is from Aussie Soil Blocks, often at a lot of markets. Are you at markets every weekend or most weekends?
Yeah, most weekends. I'm going to start putting up a monthly schedule, so I think that's on the agenda for today or tomorrow. I'll be putting up my next month's schedule on my socials and on my website. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. And on that note, so website is www.aussie, as in AUSSIE, soilblocks.com, and then Instagram and Facebook, Aussie Soil Blocks, with some underscores in there that maybe heads the website, and then you'll find the info there. But thank you again so much, Fiona, for your time, and thank you everyone for tuning in.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.